Shema Yisrael Yahweh Eloheinu Yahweh Echad V'yatot Yahweh Elhecha B'kol Aveka Uvkona Sheka Uvkol Ma'adeka. Hear, O Israel, Yahweh is your Elohim, Yahweh is one, and you shall love Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart, with all your being, with all your might.
All right. Well, it's the Shabbat before the Hag. So it's time to talk about preparing for the feast again. Woo! So, are you ready for Christmas? Oh, wait a minute. Isn't that what people are going to start saying after Thanksgiving? If not before. So, actually, if people are concerned about preparing for those pagan holidays, doesn't it seem like we should think about, are we ready? Are we ready for the feast? For the feast of Yahweh. Physically, we prepare. Y'all know where you're going to be staying, right? And you notice he's not on there again. Y'all know where you're going to be staying, right? Whether you got a tent planned. You don't have your tent up yet, but you've been thinking about that. Some people buy tents, do special shopping, which we did, didn't we? Make housing arrangements, which some people still haven't done. Better get her done. Basically preparing for just the physical aspects of the feast. So I wonder if the people who haven't prepared for the physical aspects have even thought about the spiritual aspects. So we need to think about preparing for the spiritual aspects of the feast. I'm going to talk about two duties that we need to fulfill to prepare for the spiritual feast. Number one is to examine ourselves. Now we've been accused of having a lot of drama. Now sometimes drama is because people didn't examine themselves, and they didn't, clean out the cobwebs. And sometimes it's because other people didn't examine their attitudes, look at themselves, and we tend to become judgmental during the feast. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a little while. So we need to examine ourselves. First of all, the scripture talks about judge not lest you be judged. Well, we've talked about that before, and we know that we need to judge by the Torah. But we need to be judging who first? Ourselves. We need to make sure that we've done that we've judged ourselves. And then when we think about the feast, and I think it's true with a small group like this, that it's probably more true that we really do look forward to and enjoy the feast. But when we had large groups, there were people who just literally endured the feast. That's, it was just something that Yahweh commanded, so well, here we go. We'll just have to, we'll have to endure this, and it'll be over in 8 days. So we have to look at that, and we don't want to be in that category. We do want to enjoy it. Is the spiritual feast, and sometimes when we look at that and say enduring, we mean endure the meetings and then enjoy the physical. But is the spiritual feast secondary to the physical feast? Let's go to Leviticus chapter 23. Been reading that a lot lately. Leviticus chapter 23, beginning at verse 34. Speak to the children of Israel, saying, on the 15th day of this 7th month is the festival of booths, for 7 days to Yahweh. The 15th is next Tuesday. It's it's the October 27th this year. This is the 50th year that I've kept the feast. For my first feast was 1966. So in one form or another, I've kept this feast for 50. This year will be the 50th year. And we used to read this scripture just like that. On the 15th day of the 7th month is the Feast of Booths. A lot of people thought that said booze. And, we know some people who still think it's the Feast of Booths, but not here, not here. Not this year, anyway. So it's the Feast of Booths for 7 days. It says on the first day is a set-apart gathering. You do no servile work, so it is a Shabbat. It's a Shabbat. No servile work. For 7 days, you bring an offering made by fire to Yahweh. So some of you have fairly new jobs and you haven't got it totally, you got it worked out. Well, you just have to work it out. You forcefully work it out for the high days. But sometimes you haven't worked it out. You haven't got enough time in, and so you might have to work. That doesn't mean you can't keep the feast for 7 days. It doesn't mean you can't present yourself to Yahweh as a fire offering every day of the feast. On the 8th day, it might be just a little harder that way. On the 8th day, there shall be a Kodesh Mikra. And these are, this is a Kodesh Mikra. A set-apart gathering is a Kodesh Mikra. It's a rehearsal. We're rehearsing something. What are we rehearsing? Hopefully we're not rehearsing booze, right? All right. So on the 8th day is a rehearsal, set-apart gathering for you, and you shall bring an offering made by fire to Yahweh. So really it's 8 days. It is a closing festival. The Hebrew is Shemini Atzeret. Shemini Atzeret, closing festival. You do no work, and when we come to that last day, we'll show you that it is a rehearsal of the closing day or the closing event of Yahweh's plan of salvation. So the 7 days picture the step before the last act or event of Yahweh's plan. So it's something in Yahweh's plan that we're going to be rehearsing. These are the appointed times of Yahweh, which you proclaim as Kodesh Mikra, rehearsals, to bring an offering made by fire to Yahweh, a burnt offering and a grain offering, a slaughtering and a drink offering, as commanded for every day, besides the Sabbaths of Yahweh. So this week, this is the second Sabbath of this week. The week before we had 2 Sabbaths, didn't we? We had trumpets and then the weekly Sabbath. This week we had atonement and then today, the weekly Sabbath. Next week we will have 2 Sabbaths. The first high day and the weekly Sabbath. And then the next week we have 2 Sabbaths again. So the 7th month is full of Sabbaths. It's full of Sabbaths. And you keep these Sabbaths pretty much the same way during the feast as you keep the weekly Sabbath, except that there is allowance made for extra food preparations on the festival Sabbaths. Okay? Then it says in verse 39, well, it tells you in verse 38, you have to, besides all your vows and your voluntary offerings, which you give to Yahweh, in the verse 39, on the 15th day of the 7th month, when you gather in the fruit of the land, so it's got to be at the end of the year, the turn of the end of the sun's growing cycle, if you will. And the growing cycle begins when the sun crosses the equator in the spring, and it concludes after the sun has crossed the equator in the fall, going south again. Okay? On the 15th day, when you gather in the fruit, observe the festival for 7 days. On the first day is a rest, on the 8th day is a rest, and you shall take for yourselves on the first day. So it's a rest, and yet there's a little bit of manual labor that we're going to be doing, and Yahweh doesn't consider it work. It's part of his command. You take for yourselves on the first day the fruit of good trees, branches of palm trees, twigs of leafy trees, and willows of the stream, and shall rejoice before Yahweh your Elohim for 7 days. So on Tuesday, it's the first day of the week. We're going to be cutting some palm fronds and some leafy branches, and we're going to put it together in a shelter that people can go in and eat under during the feast. Willows of the stream. But you rejoice before Yahweh for 7 days. You shall observe it as a festival to Yahweh for 7 days in the year, a law forever in your generations. Observe it in the 7th month, so that your generations know that I made the children of Israel dwell in booths, and the Hebrew word is sukkot. This is where the name of this festival comes from. It's the Feast of Booths or Sukkot. Now, sukkahs, or Sukkot, were originally little shelters that were built for the animals in the field. They weren't elaborate. They were just a bunch of branches just to give the animals a little shelter from the wind in the winter and the rains that came in that area. That's the kind of thing. Now, when Israel came out of Egypt, did they dwell in those kinds of things? What did they dwell in? Tents. They had tents made out of animal skins. They still were temporary. As long as they were sojourning, they were dwelling in tents. When did Israel stop dwelling in tents? When they went into the land and then they built cities. But all the while they were moving, they were dwelling in tents because you could pick it up and move it. So it was a temporary dwelling. That's what a sukkah is. It's not just the thing that you take and build with the brush, the branches. It's a temporary dwelling. It's not where you live all week long or all year long. It's a temporary dwelling. So there are lots of things that can be. A hotel room was a sukkah for many of us for many years, and there may be some people coming to this feast that will stay in a hotel room. I think there is one person, has not asked for lodging, but told me he plans to come, and I believe he probably will stay at one of the inns up the road. And that's okay. That's all right. That's not his home. Dwell in booths for 7 days. All who are native Israelites dwell in booths, so that your generation knows that I made the children of Israel dwell in these sukkot, these temporary dwellings, when I brought them out of the land of Mitzrayim. I am Yahweh your Elohim. Thus did Yahweh speak to Moses of the appointed times of Yahweh to the children of Israel. So now we come, this word for festival is the Chag. And so when we come to the festival, we'll be saying, hello there, Kathy. No, we'll not only say hello there, Kathy, we'll say Chag Sameach. Now, why are these festivals called Chags? Because they're what? Well, no, that the Chag in Hebrew does not carry the meaning of commanded. It's cycle. Actually, I guess I didn't bring that with me, but I have an Aramaic and Hebrew concordance here, and if you look up the word, chet, gimel, you will find that it means, it was also used for a circle dance. A circle dance. So those people who objected to us dancing in a circle, that's a Hebrew, that is definitely a Hebrew practice. But it is cyclical, because the sun is cyclical, isn't it? The sun goes from equinox to equinox and then solstice to solstice, and it goes in a cycle. Well, these days follow the cycle of the sun. They start in the spring, they go to the 7th month, and then there's a pause, and then they start over again when that cycle comes around. That's why they're called Chag, because it tells you that there's a cycle and it's something that's done every year. It's done on a regular cycle. And then we have the word samach or sameach, which is what we say, and that does mean to rejoice. It means to rejoice. And in some cases it means to rejoice arrogantly. Now, we don't like the word arrogant, which we probably shouldn't. It carries with it a lot of the connotation of pride. But it means kind of unbridled rejoicing. Really, really rejoicing. So it definitely doesn't fit enduring, does it? Not at all. So that's what we're supposed to. We're supposed to be glad. We're supposed to make others glad. We're supposed to really enjoy it. Deuteronomy chapter 14. Deuteronomy chapter 14. So this is what we need to do, is we need to look at our attitude. Are we looking forward to the rejoicing in the physical feast, and rejoicing in whatever Yahweh covers us with his ruach during this period of time? He does want us to enjoy the physical. He wouldn't want us to be fasting for 8 days or even 3/4 of the day for 8 days. He wants us to rejoice. Here's how he defines it in Deuteronomy 14:22. You shall tithe without fail all the yield of your grain that the field brings forth year by year. And you shall eat before Yahweh your Elohim in the place where he chooses to make his name dwell, the tithe of your grain, of your new wine, of your oil, and of the firstlings of your herds and your sheep, so that you learn to fear Yahweh your Elohim always. So, what's a tithe? A tithe is, we put some notes back there for you, Tim, on where you sat last week. Okay, but you found one, okay. So that's 1/10 of what you produce. 1/10, so you think about 1/10 of what you produce, and you consider that you're going to eat it within an 8-day period. That's a lot of eating, isn't it? I mean, when he was talking about this, it was produce. So if you raised wheat, what would a farmer raise in wheat? Probably thousands of bushels. So if you raised 10,000 bushels of wheat, you'd have 1,000 bushels of wheat just for this festival. Just to give you kind of a comparison. Yeah, that'd be a lot of bread. But just to give you an idea, if you had 1,000 bushels of grapes you produced, you'd be eating 100 bushels of grapes during the feast, or sharing it. There's where the booze comes in. Yep. So I mean, just think about that. Now, if your income is let's see, $25,000, then you'd have $2,500 if you turned it into cash to spend at the feast, according to this principle, in 8 days. Okay? Just to give you an idea now, what Yahweh is, put it in perspective, what Yahweh is telling you to do and to rejoice in. He said in verse 24, when the way is too long, and you're doing that all to learn how to fear Yahweh. Now that takes some mental work on your part. And if the way is too long for you, say if you were a farmer like they weren't called farmers, but they were herders, and they raised their grapes and their own, all their wheat and all of that sort of thing. He said, if the way is too long for you and you can't carry that 100 bushels of wheat and those 10 bushels of grapes or whatever, however many grapes you got, all that produce, if it's too far and you can't carry all that stuff and you're not able to bring the tithe, or when the place where Yahweh your Elohim chooses to put his name is too far from you, when Yahweh your Elohim is blessing you, then you shall give it in silver. Not that is to trade it or to exchange it, to make it go into silver. That's why I use the monetary income. And go to the place which Yahweh your Elohim chooses. And you shall use the silver for whatever your being desires. For cattle, for sheep. Well, why would you go somewhere and buy a cow or a bull? Yep. That's what it's really talking about. It means for like a steak or a leg of lamb or, lamb chops, or whatever your soul, he says, whatever your soul desires. He says for wine or strong drink. The word strong drink here is in the Hebrew is really a word that it would be better translated beer. It's not whiskey. But I mean, you could enjoy a little bit, but you have to do this in moderation, because Yahweh has plenty of prohibitions against drunkenness, doesn't he? So whatever you enjoy has to be within the realm of the rest of the Torah. For whatever your being desires, but your desires have to be tailored by the Torah. You can't have something that you desire outside the Torah and then say, well, Yahweh says whatever I desire. It's got to be, first of all, your first concern is, well, in the first place, if you were that kind of person, the chances are Yahweh wouldn't bless you anyway. So you wouldn't have that much. But your first concern is to be a Torah observant person. And you shall rejoice, you and your household. Chapter 12, back up a chapter, a couple chapters. Chapter 12 in verse 5. And you see, we're going to see another principle here, a principle of sharing. Because not everybody can rejoice the same way if everybody only uses their tithe. Okay? Deuteronomy 12 and 5. Seek the place which Yahweh your Elohim chooses out of all your tribes to put his name there for his dwelling place, and there you shall enter. And there you shall take your burnt offerings, your tithes, the contributions of your hand, your vowed offerings, and your voluntary offerings, the firstlings of your herd and of your flock. So, I didn't even mention the cattle part. If you had, if you started out the year with 100 sheep and you ended up the year with 200, so you had a gain of 100, you'd have 10 that you'd have to go and eat in a week. And if it was a bigger number, it'd be a bigger number. So that it has to do with your flocks too. There you shall eat before Yahweh in verse 7, your Elohim, and shall rejoice in all that you put your hand to do, you and your households in which Yahweh your Elohim has blessed you. Do not do as we are doing here today, each one doing whatever is right in his own eyes, because you have not entered the rest and the inheritance which Yahweh your Elohim is giving you. So they weren't doing that there when they were still, this is before they come to Joshua and cross into the land. But he says, when you come into the land and Yahweh blesses you, then you take 10% and you go to this festival and you enjoy yourself. That's pretty much what he's saying. Chapter 16, Deuteronomy chapter 16 and verse 13, perform the festival of booths, sukkot, for 7 days after the ingathering from your threshing floor and from your winepress, and you shall rejoice in your festival, you and your son and your daughter and your male servant and your female servant, and the Levite, and the stranger, and the fatherless, and the widow who are within your gates. People who are less fortunate, have less, and they're not necessarily less blessed because you're supposed to be part of their blessing. They just have less, and you're supposed to help them rejoice. For 7 days you shall observe this Chag to Yahweh, your Elohim, in the place which he chooses, because Yahweh, your Elohim, does bless you in all your increase and in all the work of your hands, and you shall be only rejoicing. So, what kind of an attitude do you need to have in order to be rejoicing? Positive. Nobody rejoices with negativity, do they? We don't rejoice with grumbling. We don't rejoice with criticizing. We rejoice with whatsoever is of good report, whatsoever is lovely. Now sometimes our drama is caused because, yes, we have problems because we're all human beings. The problems should be worked out between people, and when somebody can't get it worked out to their satisfaction, then they come to that authority we were talking about last night, and then it becomes our responsibility. Okay? And once it becomes our responsibility, then the talking about it should cease, because it is the continual the chatter and the continual talking about it that causes the drama, right? And that's what we should all take the responsibility to suppress. Sometimes we need other people to work something out with us, but when the problem is put to the proper authorities and to Yahweh, then we shouldn't let it be a negative force among us. Because how can we rejoice if all we've got is drama? And that has happened in the past. We've had people who've come to the feast and they've left the feast and they've never come back because we had too much drama. So we don't want to do that. We don't want anybody to, be turned off by drama. Okay, number 2. So that's number 1, is to examine our attitude. What is our approach as we're coming up to this feast? And how are we going to conduct ourselves to rejoice? Only rejoicing, he says in Deuteronomy 16 and verse 15. The end of verse 15. Only rejoicing. All right. The second one is to study ahead. What does the fall feast picture? In other words, what are we rehearsing? We need to tune our mind into the feast frequently, or into the feast frequency early. And it's not too early now. Let's do that a little bit by looking at some of the scriptures. Isaiah chapter 25 and verse 6. Isaiah 25 and verse 6. And don't ask me why I've got that twice in the notes. Maybe it's because it's important. Isaiah 25 and verse 6. And in this mountain of Yahweh, or in this mountain, Yahweh of hosts, and in a mountain, we don't have to be in a mountain to keep the feast. He's talking about, a mountain is also a symbol of a nation or a people. And we are a people of Yahweh. In this mountain, Yahweh of hosts shall make for all people a feast of choice pieces, a feast of old wines. Oh, I see why I've got that twice, because I have 2 different translations there. A feast of old wines, of choice pieces with marrow, of old wines well refined. And I guess I think the King James says this, and this is what I was used to seeing for all those years. In this mountain shall Yahweh of hosts make unto all peoples a feast of fat things. That doesn't mean fat people, but a feast of fat things. In other words, and you're not supposed to eat, the big slabs of fat, but if you're going to eat a steak, and if you were to cut every morsel of fat out of it, it would be tasteless. Yahweh did not intend that. It's the big slabs of fat that Yahweh says they belong to him and they're a sweet savor, and you burn them up. But you can have a little bit on your brisket or on your on your steak, and it's fine. It just gives it flavor. You don't eat necessarily that, but it does flavor what you're going to eat. A feast of wine on the lees, of fat things full of marrow, of wines on the lees well refined. That's I kind of like that King James Version, the way it reads. It's kind of I don't know, I guess it's a nostalgic thing. Ecclesiastes 5 and verse 1. Ecclesiastes is the festival scroll for the Feast of Sukkot. We read it in its entirety. We read a couple chapters every day until we get to the last day. In verse 1 of chapter 5, we read this: guard your steps when you go into the house of Elohim. Now, granted, we kind of consider this a house of Elohim. It's not the one that's going to be in Jerusalem. There's not one over there right now. There isn't one really here on the face of the earth. But this is a house where we worship Yahweh and where we call on him to come among us and where we fellowship with him. And it says to guard your steps when you come into the house of Elohim. Draw near to listen rather than to give the slaughtering of fools. So we should pay attention to, what we say to each other, what we say in our prayers, what we're thinking, because we don't want to give the slaughtering of fools. For they do not know that they do evil. Do not be hasty with your mouth, and let not your heart hurry to bring forth a word before Elohim. For Elohim he's right there on the other side through that portal in heaven, and you on earth. Therefore let your words be few. For a dream comes through the greatness of the task, and a fool's voice is known by his many words. When you make a vow to Elohim, do not delay to pay it, for he takes no pleasure in fools. Pay that which you have vowed. So, one thing we can do there when we're watching our words is that we can make sure that we're courteous. We're here, fellowship is an important part, but we not only should be courteous of Yahweh, everybody else here is a temple of Yahweh's Ruach, so pay attention. Use etiquette when you're talking. Don't be the one that's always talking. Give somebody else a chance, and listen. Let's have fellowship, not monoship. Okay? So that's one way we can apply that scripture. Ecclesiastes 12:13, when we come to the end of the chapter, it says, let us hear the conclusion of the entire matter. Fear Elohim, and isn't that the first goal? So that you may know that Yahweh brought the children of Israel out of the land, and that you may fear Yahweh, your Elohim. Fear Elohim, guard his commands, for this applies to all mankind. Isaiah chapter 11 and verse 1. This is something that we're rehearsing, because in the plan of Yahweh, Brian just read those scriptures again the other day about the lamb that was slain for the world. And actually that word is say. It's the say. But the Passover say was not slain for the sins of the world, right? And so we learned that way back, keeping Passover for however many years we've been keeping that. The Passover say was first of all slain to redeem the first fruits. That's the first step in the plan of salvation. You got to have first of the first fruits, Yahshua, and he's the one that was slain. And he was slain for the Bikurim, the second group of first fruits, which are the 144,000. And in order for the resurrection of everybody to take place, which is one of the things that we're going to be thinking about during Sukkot, because Ezekiel 37, the dry bones resurrection, happens at the beginning of the millennium. And all those people, the whole house of Israel, in most cases, all our mothers and fathers, our grandparents, I don't know anybody who knows that their grandparent or great-grandparent was a Sabbatarian, unless they were a Seventh-day Adventist, and a Yahwist, a believer in Yahweh, knowing the name and immersed in the name and lived according to Torah. I don't know anybody. Not a single one. So, that's all the people that I know and their relatives, and who knows how many other millions of people that are going to be the whole house of Israel. Who's going to teach them? Who's going to be their teacher? And that's one of the things that we're rehearsing during Sukkot. And a rod shall come forth from the stump of Yeshai, and a sprout, this is Isaiah 11:1, from his roots shall it bear fruit. The Ruach of Yahweh shall rest upon him. This is the Yahshua, because he has to come first, and then he's going to resurrect the first fruits, and then they're going to be prepared to be the teachers of the whole house of Israel. The spirit of wisdom and understanding, the spirit of counsel and might, the spirit of knowledge and of the fear of Yahweh, and shall make him breathe in the fear of Yahweh, and he shall not judge by the sight of his eyes, nor decide by the hearing of his ears. So that should tell us that we should be practicing, rehearsing during the feast our judgment. But with righteousness he shall judge the poor. He shall decide with straightness for the meek ones of the earth, and shall smite the earth with the rod of his mouth, and slay the wrong with the breath of his lips. And righteousness shall be the girdle of his loins, and trustworthiness the girdle of his waist. And a wolf shall dwell with the lamb, and a leopard shall lie down with the young goat. and the calf and the young lion and the fatling together, and a little child leads them. And cow and bear shall feed their young ones and lie down together, and a lion eat straw like an ox. And the nursing child shall play on the cobra's hole, and the weaned child shall put his hand in the adder's den, and nothing shall hurt. Wow, what a nice time that's going to be. And we won't have to worry about lost people. You know, when you're a spirit being, if you were a spirit being today, we wouldn't have to wonder where your dad was, would we? But Yahweh knows, so we have to ask Yahweh to lead us there. So it's a rehearsal. You know, we need to learn the difference between policing and teaching. And you know, I've never used this terminology before, but this has to do with judgment. Because we are great policers if we've known the Torah very long. But sometimes we're not very good teachers. But what comes first? Let me use the children for an example. We have taught, and some of them are in the room anyway, so we can just share this as adults. But we have taught, there's a particular door in the other building that we don't want the children to go in and out of, right? Now, if we just start beating them because they go in and out that door, that's policing. And that's not right until we tell them, is it? So we tell them, we instruct that we teach first, and then if they look at us and do it anyway, then we have to police it. You know, that's the same way with adults. And really, when we think about Acts chapter 15 and the things that they had to do before they were allowed to come into the, do you think that they taught them first that those things were wrong and then said those are the things you can't do? Or did they police them first? They taught them first. I mean, that's only logical, right? When adults come into the congregation, do we police them first or do we teach them first? And just like with the children, if you teach them and they know, and you know that they understand, but they do it anyway, I do it anyway, then you have to police it. And sometimes that means there's punishment. That's the same way it has to be with adults. Are the same way. We're all the children of Yahweh. We have to teach first before we police. And that's one of the things that, when it says a rod shall come from the stump, look at all the things the rod's going to do. But the rod is going to be compassionate. So we have to learn compassion. And we have to do it in the right order. Both teaching and policing are in our job description as followers of Yahweh. But we have to balance the policing and make sure we've done the teaching. Look at it in Romans chapter 7. Romans chapter 7 and verse 7. This is proof that this principle is true. What then shall we say? Is the Torah sin? Well, of course we would never say that. Let it not be. However, I did not know sin except through the Torah. So, you know, where there is no teaching, there is no violation. You have to have the teaching first. You have to have the law first. You have to have the Torah first. And then, if you have the Torah and someone violates the Torah, then it's sin. But it's not sin until they're taught. For also, he said, I did not know sin except through the Torah. For also the covetousness I knew not, if the Torah had not said, you shall not covet. But sin, having taken the occasion through the command, did work in me all sorts of covetousness. For apart from Torah, sin is dead. In other words, if you don't know Torah, you're not accountable for the sin. So we need to learn that. That's part of the thing that we're going to be rehearsing. Zechariah chapter 14. Zechariah 14. Some more of the millennial business that we're going to be hopefully rehearsing, thinking about, rejoicing over. Zechariah 14. I'm only going to read, I'm going to read the 14th chapter. We're going to read it again in the next few weeks in our Wednesday night studies because we're into the book of Zechariah. Beginning in verse 1, see, a day shall come for Yahweh. And, we're talking about that period of time that we're going to be rehearsing all week. And your spoil shall be divided in your midst, and I shall gather all the Gentiles to battle against Jerusalem. So that's the negative thing. And the city shall be taken, the houses plundered, the women ravished. Half of the city shall go into exile, but the remnant of the people shall not be cut off from the city. And Yahweh shall go forth, and he shall fight against those Gentiles as he fights in the day of battle. And we read, this is Revelation, chapter 11 stuff, isn't it? And in that day, his feet, Messiah's feet, shall stand upon the Mount of Olives, which faces Jerusalem on the east. And when he does arrive, it says in 1 Corinthians 15 that the Kodashim are going to be with him. And the Mount of Olives shall be split in two from the east to the west, a very great valley, and half of the mountain shall move toward the north, and half of it toward the south. And you shall flee to the valley of my mountain, for the valley of the mountains reaches to Atzal. And you shall flee as you fled from the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, sovereign of Yehudah. And Yahweh, my Elohim, shall come, all the Kodashim, with you. There it is. And in that day it shall be, there is no light, or it is dark. And it shall be one day which is known to Yahweh neither day nor night, but at eventime there shall be light. And in that day it shall be that living waters flow from Jerusalem, half of them toward the eastern sea and half of them toward the western sea, in summer as well as in winter. And Yahweh shall be ruler, sovereign, king, over all. And which Yahweh is this at this time? This is the Yahweh that became Yahshua. This is the return of Yahshua, but he's going to have the name Yahweh because the Father doesn't come until the 1,000 years is over. In that day there shall be one Yahweh and his name one. Well, Yahweh is Echad. So he is one. There's only going to be one here at that time because his Father's not going to be here yet. All the land shall be changed into a desert plain from Geva to Rimmon, south of Jerusalem, and she shall be raised up and inhabited in her place from Benjamin's gate to the place of the first gate and the corner gate, and from the tower of Hananeel to the winepresses of the sovereign. They shall dwell in her, there shall be no more utter destruction, but Jerusalem shall be safely inhabited. This is the plague which Yahweh plagues all the people who fought against Jerusalem. Their flesh shall decay while they stand on their feet, and their eyes decay in their sockets, and their tongues decay in their mouths. And it shall be in that day that a great confusion from Yahweh is among them, and every one of them shall seize the hand of his neighbor, and his hand rise up against his neighbor's hand. And Yehudah shall fight at Jerusalem as well, and the wealth of all the Gentiles round about shall be gathered together, gold, silver, and garments in great quantities, so that there is a plague on the horse and the mule. So also is the plague on the horse and the mule, on the camel and the donkey, on all the cattle that are in those camps, as this plague. And it shall be that all who are left from all the nations which come up against Jerusalem shall go from year to year to bow themselves to the sovereign Yahweh of hosts, and to observe the festival of Sukkot. So even what we're rehearsing this next week is going to be kept in that millennium. And it shall be that if any one of the clans of the earth does not come up to Jerusalem to bow himself to the sovereign of hosts, on them there is no rain. And if the clan of Mitzrayim does not come up and enter in, then there is no rain. On them is the plague which Yahweh plagues the Gentiles who do not come up to observe the feast of Sukkot. This is the punishment of Mitzrayim and the punishment of all the nations who do not come up to observe the festival of Sukkot. In that day, Kadosh to Yahweh shall be engraved on the bells of the horses, and the pots of the house of Yahweh shall be like the bowls before the altar. And every pot in Jerusalem and Yehuda shall be set apart, Kadosh, to Yahweh of hosts, and all those who slaughter shall come and take them and cook in them, and there shall no longer be a merchant in the house of Yahweh of hosts in that day. So even in what we're going to be rehearsing, when that day that we're rehearsing comes to be, we're still going to be keeping the Feast of Sukkot. It's still going to be kept. A little bit more about it in Isaiah 35. Isaiah 35 and verse 1, verses 1 to 10. Let the wilderness and the dry place be glad for them, and the desert rejoice and blossom as the rose. It blossoms much and rejoices, even with joy and singing. The esteem of Lebanon shall be given to it, the excellence of Carmel and of Sharon. They shall see the esteem of Yahweh, the excellency of our Elohim. Strengthen the weak hands, make firm the weak knees. Say to those with anxious heart, be strong, do not fear. See, your Elohim comes with vengeance, with the recompense of Elohim, which we were reading about in Zechariah 14. He's coming to save you. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, the ears of the deaf be opened. Then the lame shall leap like a deer, and the tongue of the dumb sing, because waters shall burst forth in the wilderness and streams in the desert. And the parched ground shall become a pool, and the thirsty land springs of water. In the home for jackals, where each lay, grass with reeds and rushes. And there shall be a highway and a way, and it shall be called the way of Kadosh, or set apartness. The unclean does not pass over it, but it is for those who walk the way, and no fools wander on it. No lion is there, nor any ravenous beast go up on it. It is not found there. But the redeemed shall walk there, and the ransomed of Yahweh shall return and enter Zion with singing, with everlasting joy on their heads. They shall obtain joy and gladness, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away. So when we're rehearsing that, and we're rehearsing that road, we should be rejoicing greatly. Isaiah 30 and verse 18. And therefore Yahweh shall wait to show you favor, and therefore he shall be exalted to have compassion on you. For Yahweh is an Elohim of right ruling. Blessed are all those who wait for him. And verse 19, for the people shall dwell in Zion at Jerusalem. You shall weep no more. He shall show much favor to you at the sound of your cry. When he hears, he shall answer. When he hears, he shall answer you. Wonderful thing to rejoice in there. Isaiah 55, verses 1 to 13. Ho, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters. That was my ringtone. I got to fetch that again. And you who have no silver, come, buy and eat. Come, buy wine and milk without silver and without price. Why do you weigh out silver for what is not bread, and your labor for what does not satisfy? Listen to me, and eat what is tov, and let your being delight itself in fatness. Incline your ear and come to me. Hear, so that your being lives, and let me make an everlasting covenant with you, the trustworthy kindness of David. See, I have given him as a witness to the people, a leader and a commander for the people. See, a nation you do not know shall call, and a nation who does not know you run to you because of Yahweh your Elohim and the Kadosh One of Israel. For he has adorned you. Seek Yahweh while he is to be found. Call on him while he is near. Let the wrong forsake his way, and the unrighteous man his thoughts. Let him return to Yahweh who has compassion on him, and to our Elohim, for he pardons much. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares Yahweh. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. For as the rain comes down and the snow from the heavens, and do not return there, but water the earth and make it bring forth and bud and give seed to the sower and bread to the eater, so is my word that it goes forth from my mouth. It does not return to me empty, but shall do what I please, and shall certainly accomplish what I sent for it. For with joy you go out, and with peace you are brought in. The mountains and the hills break forth into singing before you, and all the trees of the field clap their hands. Instead of the thorn, the cypress comes up. Instead of the nettle, the myrtle comes up. And it shall be to Yahweh for a name, for an everlasting sign, which is not cut off. It's a time of peace and a time of harmony. And we're going to be rehearsing that in just a few more days. You can read Psalm 119, 165. I think that's the one that says, great peace have they that love thy law. Well, I guess I should turn there, because that may not be the one. Psalm 119, 165. No, that's behold how good and how pleasant it is, isn't it? That brothers dwell together in unity. Psalm 119, 165. Great peace have those loving your Torah, for them there is no stumbling block. But there's another one, Hinei Matov, Uman Naim, Shavet Akim, Gam Yakad. Behold how good and how pleasant it is for brothers to dwell together in unity. And you have a few other scriptures there too. And Hebrews 10:25 is important because it says, not forsaking the assembling of yourselves together as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much more as you see the day approaching. And can you see the day approaching? I think we can all see the day approaching. So there are a couple of things that you can be thinking about as we're looking ahead to Tuesday, Monday night. And I guess some of us will be here tomorrow putting up tents and finishing touches. All through the feast, take time every day to renew the purpose of the feast. Talking to Yahweh, studying the messages, the notes, the studies, and the scriptures relating to the purpose of this feast. As I mentioned to you, my first feast was 50 years ago, 1966. And we started saying then that every year the feast gets better. And so I hope for you, I don't know how many feasts this is for you, for some it's the first, but I hope you'll find that as you really apply yourself to the feast and as you rejoice before Yahweh and his scriptures, that every feast will be better than the last one. You will always have the best purpose-filled feast that you've ever had. May Yahweh bless you and guard you. May Yahweh make his face shine upon you and give you his favor. May Yahweh lift his countenance over you and give you his peace. Yivarekeka Yahweh vayishmereka, Ya'er Yahweh panavaleka, vikaneka v'yasem laka shalom.